Hey guys, Bet here. Welcome back to another Escape from Tarkov video. Today I wanted to do a site guide for the sites that are sold by the different vendors. The reason I wanted to do this is until you've bought some of the sites, it's sort of hard to get an idea of what they look like on the gun, as well as what the site picture looks like when you're aiming down sites. So I wanted to compile sort of a database of where you get the sights from, at what level you can get them, and what they look like when you put them on the gun. So this is going to be part one of two. After my beginner to Tarkov guide ended up being a lot longer than I expected at nearly 45 minutes, I wanted to sort of try to get this video to be significantly shorter than that, hopefully less than half the length. And as such, part one is going to deal with the vendors at Tier 1 and Tier 2 and the sites that you can buy from them at those tiers. And the second part, which should come up in a couple of days, is going to deal with the sites that you can buy at Tier 3 and Tier 4 vendors. Before we get started, I do want to say that when you are looking for sort of a quick reference guide as to where you can buy each site from and what the site picture looks like, I'm going to have a link in the description to a Google document, Google Slides doc, that's going to have slides for each of the different sites, giving you information as to how much they cost, what vendor you buy them, and what tier the vendor needs to be for you to buy them. Hopefully that's something that you can, after you've watched the video, you can go back and quick reference that guide if there's a particular site that you're wondering if you have access to, or one that you thought in the video that was interesting without having to watch the whole video again, because it's going to be a lot of information to go through. We are going to be showing all of the sites on a AK-74N. The reason we're doing this is because it's one of the few guns that can run all of the sights in the game, because I can put a Picatinny rail on the top using the TT-1000 mount available from Skier Tier 2, and it also has the dovetail mount on the side, so the sites that only use the dovetail mount, it's able to mount as well. This sort of takes the distraction away from, oh, does that sight look different because it's on a different gun, as opposed to the sight looking different because the sight actually looks different. So hopefully we can avoid that by using the one gun throughout all of the different sight picture demonstrations. One final thing before we get started is that if you are a complete beginner to the game and you have only Tier 1 vendors for sort of every vendor, the gun that you want to buy, if you absolutely are dead set on using sights, is going to be the PP-19 or the Vityaz submachine gun, which I can pull up here. Unlike the AKs, the SKS, and the Veprs that you can buy at Tier 1 from Skier and Prapor, this is the only gun that has a dovetail mount on the side, which allows you to mount the Cobra sight that you can buy from Prapor, which I'll talk about more in a second. And also, in order to put a Picatinny rail on top to facilitate the sights that need a rail to be mounted, you can buy this Axion Cobra mount and mount it on the side of this gun. If you absolutely need to use a sight to feel like you can use the gun, that is the gun that I would recommend at the lower tiers, although it is fairly expensive for being a low level, and it does take the 9mm ammunition, which is not the greatest ammunition in the game. The AK-74U is going to be cheaper and more effective in combat as far as stopping power goes, but you will not be able to put a sight on it until you are at vendor Tier 2. So just a little word of warning before we get started, but now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the sights. Alright, so the first site we're going to be looking at is the PSO Site that is available at Skier Tier 1. It is a one-piece site, meaning that you don't need to buy an additional piece to have it mounted to the rail. And it has a cost of 10,378 rubles. It's mounted on the rail system, so it is not a dovetail mount site. It has a magnification of 1. As you can see, it's just a red dot site. And it is a sort of a medium level sight, meaning you can't really mount it on pistols, but you can mount it on the 45-degree angled sight that you can buy from Peacekeeper. It doesn't really have any other special abilities, but I'll cycle through the different types of red dots you have, and then we'll move on to the next sight. So you have this sort of T shape with the dot in the top of the T. You can remove the dot, and then you can also go to a single dot, and then you can go back to the beginning. So there's 3 different site pictures for this site, and it's one of the cheapest that you can get, and also one of the first ones that you can get. All right, secondly, we're going to be talking about the AMM site, available again from available. This one's available from Peacekeeper Tier 1. It is a two-piece site, meaning that you need the top part of the site as well as the bottom mount for an additional cost. Typically, when there's a mount for a site that you need to mount it to the Picatinny rail, it is available right next to the site in the same vendor. This site can also be a three-piece site, as there is. Let me open up my inventory for you now. You can buy this AMSH, which is a spacer, and I can't install this during the raid, but it basically lifts the site up a little bit off of the rail, and it would go in between the rail mount and the site itself. And I believe this is specifically for mounting it to an MP5, as if you mount this AMM to an MP5 site, the aiming ring at the front of the MP5 will actually intersect with the red dot. You can see it almost does it there on the AK-74N, and that's the reason why there's that third piece that you can buy. But unless you're using it on a MP5, you shouldn't really need that extra piece. Without that extra piece, it is a cost of $213 US for the mount and the sight. And with that extra piece, it is $238 for the mount, the spacer, and then the sight. It is a rail-mounted sight, and it has a magnification of 1 times, just like the other red dot we just looked at. It is a small sight, and it's also able to fit on the angled 45-degree sight mount that you can buy from Peacekeeper to sort of dual mount sights. Alright, the next site we're going to talk about is going to be the XP-S3-2. This is sold again at Peacekeeper Tier 1, just like the last site. However, this is a one-piece site, so it doesn't require an extra mount to fit it on a Picatinny rail. It has a cost of $264 US, making it a fairly expensive site, especially for being a Tier 1 site. It's a low-level site that's fairly expensive. It is a medium-sized site with a magnification of 1. And I can zoom into that now. This is basically like a regular holographic site that you see in a lot of other games. The one thing that makes this different is the -2 designation, which instead of having one singular red dot inside of the circle, there's actually 2, one above and one sort of below. I personally don't like this site picture because I feel like having the 2 dots is distracting. At a higher level, and we'll see it in a sec here, is the XPS3-0. That's the one that has 1 dot instead of the 2 dots. So just keep that in mind if you're looking to purchase this site. Alright, and we'll move on to the next one. Alright, the next site we're looking at is a small site. It is the FF3. It is again a Peacekeeper Tier 1 site. However, it is a 2-piece, so you need the FF3 sight and then the Fastfire Weaver base in order to mount it on the Picatinny rail. Together, these 2 pieces will cost $148 USD, making it significantly cheaper than the site that we just looked at. It has a magnification of 1, just like the site that all the sites that we've looked at so far have just had a 1 times magnification. And it is one of the 2 sites that will fit on the P226 if you buy the rear sight adapter to put a little bit of rail on the back of the P226. So it is one of the smallest sites. If you can get a rail on a gun, chances are this sight will be able to fit it. So it fits on pistols, it'll fit on the angled sight, and it'll fit on top of some of the other sites that we're going to be looking at later. So you can look, and this is this is one of my personal favorite sites because it starts with just a red dot in the middle. It has a very small profile on the gun, and it gives you a fairly clear sight picture without taking up a lot of the space with sort of the actual housing of the sight. And it has just the one sort of large red dot option. So you can see I'm holding Alt and clicking right click, and it doesn't change the sight picture. So again, that's available at Peacekeeper Tier 1, and it fits on the Picatinny rail, and it's called the FF3. Alright, up next we're going to be looking at the Cobra site. This is the one that comes with the mount. It's available at Prapor Tier 1, and by comes with the mount, I mean that it's a one-piece sight with the dovetail mount that is currently sitting on. You can take a look at that on the gun as my character takes a look at that. So on the side there, where it's sort of attached at the left side of the gun, that is actually all one piece, including the sight. It is a cost of 9,735 rubles, approximately, rubles. And it is a dovetail mount sight, meaning you can mount it on any of the N designations of the AK platform or the OP SKS. It has a magnification of 1, and it also has a couple of different sight pictures, so we can look at that now. So by default, it has just a 1 red dot in the middle, and it's got a little bit of a sort of a yellowy tinge to the lens. I can change that to a chevron with a red dot over it, or just the chevron. And it also has sort of the T with sort of the intersection with a space in it, which is similar to the PSO Site that we looked at the beginning. I'm not a huge fan of this sight, although it is good for beginners because you can put it on any of the dovetail mount weapons by just buying one piece, which makes it fairly cheap. I just don't really like the sight picture, and I also feel like the mount takes up quite a bit of your screen when you're aimed in like this, or even when you have it off to the side. I feel like it's obstructing quite a bit of your vision. But again, not a bad sight for being just a tier 1 Prapor and for being under 10k rubles. Alright, so moving into the first of the tier 2 sites, this is going to be Skier tier 2. It is the OKP-7. It is a one piece that fits on a Picatinny rail, and it has a cost of 9,558 rubles. It has a magnification of 1, and it is a large sight, so it will not fit on some of the smaller rails, and it definitely will not fit on a pistol. And I believe it will also not fit on the B18 mount that is used on top of the AKS-74U to allow it to have rail-mounted sights. It only has one sight picture, and I can show you that now. It is sort of this one red dot and then sort of 2 red rings around it. I like the housing of this sight because I feel like it doesn't take up that much room, but I don't really like this sight picture. There is a different version of this sight that has a different sight picture that's available later on that I do prefer, and we'll get to that as we come to it. I believe that's a tier 3 sight, although it is a dovetail mount only. But yeah, I'm just not a huge personal fan of this sight. I guess it's up to you whether you like it or not, but I feel like the actual sight picture of the sort of the 1 red dot and then the 2 red rings isn't really my thing. Although it is fairly cheap, and it is something that you can mount on a rail, which means you can put it on a lot of different guns. And now that you're Skier tier 2, if you can afford this sight, you can also afford the amount that I have it on the AK-74N, which is the tactical Tula mount, which is facilitating me putting all these rail-mounted sights on the AK-74N. Alright, next up we have the XP3S-0. This is a Peacekeeper Tier 2 sight. It is a one piece for a cost of 219 USD. It mounts on the rail system, the Picatinny rail system, and it has a magnification of 1. It is a medium-sized sight, so it should fit on most rail systems, but it doesn't quite fit on all of them. And it won't fit on pistols and such things like that, or the angular mounted sight that Peacekeeper sells. It only has the one sight picture, and it has a sort of a bulky housing, but it's basically your sort of regular holographic sight that you see in other games. This is different from the Dash 2 because it only has the singular dot in the middle as opposed to the 2 dots that are sort of in line with each other in the middle of the sight. Also, it's cheaper than the Dash 2, so the only downside of this sight is that you have to wait to be Peacekeeper Tier 2 to use it, but I personally prefer this sight to the Dash 0, the XP 3S or S3 Dash 2. I like the Dash 0 better. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that site. Next up we have the MRS site. This is available at Peacekeeper Tier 2. It is a one piece and it has a cost of 166 USD. It's mounted on the Picatinny rail system, and as it's a one piece, it doesn't require any sort of adapter or anything like that. It has a magnification of ×1, and it will fit on small rails, including the rail for the Shrimp pistol, However, it will not fit on the angular rail that is sold by Peacekeeper. So we can take a look at the site picture now. So this is a fairly good site in my opinion, as it doesn't take up a lot of space with the actual housing of the site. There's a little bit of tint to the lens that is in the site, and the red dot's a little small, but it does have different site pictures, and I can cycle through those now for you. So it has a small red dot, then it has a slightly larger red dot, then it has sort of the dot in the sort of the T site. I'm not sure what to call that exactly, but it's come up a few times, which is one of my personal favorite sites. I kind of like that because sometimes I find it easier to lose the singular red dots in the sun and stuff when you're outside, so having a little bit more of a larger site sort of helps me find the center of it a little bit better. And finally, it's got this sort of crosshair in a circle site, which is a little bit too cluttered for me. And again, that'll take us back to the small red dot. The only thing that I'm not a huge fan of on this site is that the original sort of small red dot that it starts out with isn't my favorite. So I would cycle to either the larger red dot or this site. And I believe you have to do that currently at the beginning of every raid. So that's just one thing that turns me off of this site. But otherwise, a fairly good site, especially at Tier 2. Alright, next we're going to look at the DP site, or the Delta Point site. This is a Peacekeeper Tier 2 site. It is a two-piece, so you need the Delta Point site and then the Delta Point mount for the Picatinny rail. The collective cost of the two pieces is $136, and then it mounts on a conventional rail system, Picatinny rail system. It has a magnification of ×1, and it is also the size small enough to fit on both the angled site that Peacekeeper sells, as well as the rail that goes on the back of the P226. This makes it similar to the FF3, which is one of my other favorite sites. However, I don't like the site picture as much as this, because instead of having a red dot, it sort of has this red triangle, and it's the only site picture that is available. You can see as I attempt to cycle through them. This site's also special because you can put it on top of the hammer, and when we get to the hammer site, which is a magnified optic, I will show you that. That's a Tier 3 site. But the only thing that I really don't like about this site is that I don't like the actual optic of the red dot site picture. Is just not one of my favorite. But the housing and everything else is good, and as well as it being quite cheap compared to especially the holographic sites, which are almost twice as much. Alright, up next we have the PSO scope, which is available from Prapor Tier 2. It is a one-piece scope that costs 16,947 rubles. It uses the dovetail mounting system, so again it's mounted to the side of the gun, as you can see, as opposed to the rail on top. It has a magnification of 4 times, and being a dovetail, the size doesn't really matter. All the dovetails are sort of considered the same equivalent size. There's only one exception, which is the OPK7, or the OKP7, but we'll talk about that site when we get to it. It gives a fairly nice site picture. I like sort of the chevron in the middle, and the windage markers sort of on either side don't really matter in this game because I don't believe they have windage yet. But you can sort of use the chevron to sort of judge how much you need to shoot above or below a target in order to have the bullet hit its mark. I feel like it also gives a fairly clear sight picture. Some of the other magnified optics, especially if it's swaying and moving around like this, it seems like the aim point doesn't really stay in the center of the sight. But this is going to be, if you want a magnified scope, this is definitely going to be one of your cheapest options. Although, unlike some of the other magnified scopes, it doesn't really allow you to run another sight in conjunction with it. So if you are running this sight and you want to run a red dot as well, you would need to buy the angled sight from Peacekeeper, which I believe you can't buy until Tier 3. But yeah, this is the second to last Tier 2 site we're going to be looking at, so we'll go to the last one right now. Alright. Our final site for the Tier 2 mounts is from Prapor Tier 2. It is the Cobra site that we saw at Tier 1, but this one does not come with the dovetail sight. So if you enjoy the Cobra mount, or the Cobra sight from Tier 1 Prop War. This sight allows you to mount it on a rail system, so it allows you to put it on a bigger variety of guns than just the ones that have the dovetail mount on the side. It is a one-piece sight and has a cost of 9,735 rubles, which is identical to the one that comes with the dovetail mount sight. So if you are going to mount it on a gun that has a dovetail, I think you're better to use the dovetail mount variant as opposed to this variant, considering the cost is the same and you'd be wasting cost buying the extra mount to put a rail on. It is a large sight, so it won't fit on some of the smaller rail systems, as well as the sight picture is exactly the same as the Cobra mount with the sight on it. So it has the small red dot and then the red dot over the chevron, and then the chevron by itself, as well as the sort of the T with the middle missing. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. This has been the site guide for Tier 1 and Tier 2 vendors. This is part 1 of 2. Part 2 is going to cover the Tier 3 and Tier 4 vendors sites, and I'll have that up hopefully in a few days here. If you liked this video and you thought it was helpful, remember to give the video a like. And if you want to see more content like this in the future for Escape from Tarkov and other games I'll be playing, remember to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep doing the best with what you got.